with us, former Conservative Health Secretary, former chair of the NHS Confederation. Hello to you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. Consultants want a 35% pay rise. As I was saying to my colleague, world's smallest violin for them, or do they have a point?
Well, I think they have a point. I'm not sure, quite clear, 35% is obviously not something the government's going to agree to. But I think the wider point here is that the government's facing a kind of slow-motion car crash where it's developing disputes with the Royal College of Nursing, with the junior doctors, and now with the senior doctors. And it's blindingly obvious. You can't deliver healthcare services without having your clinicians on side. So there's a priority for them to address these separate disputes and avoid a kind of developing crisis in the health service.
Would you have given doctors, senior doctors, consultants in particular, a 35% pay rise when you were Health Secretary?
No, I've already said I don't think that's something that should be, that can be afforded. But it isn't, in a sense, it isn't what you think or what I think or even what Steve Barclay thinks. The issue that the government faces is that it can't deliver health services without clinicians. And it's failing to recruit and to retain the clinicians that it needs, partly, not exclusively, but partly because of the pay arrangements that have seen the living standards or the real pay of clinicians across the health service fall over the last decade. Now, that's an issue the government needs to address.
OK, so if you wouldn't give them a third pay rise, what would you be doing at the moment? You say that, you know, looking at their salaries and the fact that they have fallen significantly over the previous decade. Nevertheless, we are where we are. If you were in Steve Barclay's shoes today, what would you be doing?
Well, the most important thing to do is to talk to them, because you won't resolve the dispute with the junior doctors or the senior doctors or the nurses without talking to them. It's a problem that, in reality, the Secretary of State and the staff representative leaders in the BMA and in the RCN, it's a problem they face together, and they have to find a way that allows the health service to recruit and retain the staff that it needs. And we need to remember as well, this is not just a British problem. There is a worldwide shortage of doctors and nurses. And we don't live in a closed economy. This is not 1990s Albania. We have to ensure that the NHS can recruit and motivate the people it needs in an open and competitive marketplace. So, as I say again, it's not what you and I think, it's what the doctors and nurses think that will ultimately decide this.
But how do you negotiate with a union when the leader of that union, I'm talking about the RCN, Pat Cullen, says to her members, you should accept this offer, and then they reject it? And as a result, we could find ourselves in a position where nurses are once again going on strike.
Well, that is, of course, that's part of the problem that Pat Cullen faces, but also Steve Barclay faces. It's not in the interests of the Secretary of State to be in a position where they can't talk to staff representatives and believe that any deal they do is one that will stick. It was bad news for the Secretary of State when Pat Cullen did a deal, which her members then rejected. Of course, union leaders are important people here, but the most important people are union members, the members of the RCN and the members of the BMA. And we have to consider the prime concern of the Secretary of State needs to be to address the concerns of that membership directly.
The Energy Secretary, Grant Shapps, says the decision by the RCN was, frankly, rather confusing. How would you describe it?
I don't think it was remotely confusing. A proposal was made and they rejected it. I can't see how that's confusing. It's pretty straightforward to me.
I think he suggests it's confusing because Pat Cullen says one thing and her members say another, so it's almost impossible to negotiate with them.
Well, but we live in the real world. Of course, it would have been easier and simpler if the deal had gone through, but it didn't. And that's not just Pat Cullen's problem, that's Steve Barclay's problem. In order to create, it's no good just saying how wonderful staff are that work in the health service. You need to be able to demonstrate to the staff, the doctors and nurses and the wider staff, but it's the doctors and nurses who are the prime focus at the moment. You need to be able to enlist their support and their commitment. And you need to do that in a world where they have options. They don't have to work for the NHS. And the NHS needs to recognise that and to deal directly with the representatives of those people and make it and address their concerns directly.
Quick thought before I let you go. We've heard from Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester, previously high up in the Labour Party when they were in power, of course, suggesting that proportional representation is the way forward come future general elections. Music to your ears, I'm guessing.
You could say that. He and I have been exchanging tweets on the subject over the weekend. I've often disagreed with Andy Burnham in the past, but I find myself actually in very strong agreement with him about proportional representation, and also, as it happens, on our common interest in health services and on the importance of devolved management and devolved development of health and care services.